"Sergeant Wren," said the man in the black gown, "let us be plain with one another. You and I, did you steal from the king?" "Yes," I said. He had not expected that. He had a whole staircase of questions built beneath him, each one designed to walk me up to that admission slowly, so that the court could watch me sweat on every step. I took the staircase away from him in one word, and for a moment Sergeant Havel Grieve, the most expensive voice in the realm, a man who had never in 30 years lost a case he wanted, stood there holding a sheaf of papers he no longer needed. The gallery made a sound like a door opening in a cold house. "You admit it," he said. "I took a thing out of the palace that was not mine to take. I carried it past the gate I was sworn to hold. If the court calls that theft, then I am a thief, and the court may do as it likes with me. I kept my eyes forward, the way I had kept them forward for 22 years. But I will not have it said that I did it in the dark and hoped no one would notice. I did it in the daylight of my own conscience, and I have come here to say so. That is the beginning, or near enough. It is not, however, where the thing began. My name is Cadan Wren. I was a sergeant of the King's Guard, Harrowgate Company, and this account is set down at the order of the regimental sergeant major for the regimental record, the book we keep of ourselves, not for the newspapers, not for the household, but for the men who will stand our posts when we are gone. I am not a clever man with words. I am a man who counts things, paces, minutes, buttons, names. So I will count it out in the order it happened, and you may judge me at the end as the court did, and as I have judged myself every night since. It began at 7 minutes past 11 on a cold night in the first week of a new reign. 3 days before, we had crowned King Rowan. I had stood in the second rank on the cathedral steps with a wind coming up off the river, and watched the young king come out under the great door with the crown on him, and his face doing that thing faces do when a man is trying to be worthy of something. He was 31. He had a scar on his knuckle from a horse he broke at 18, and a way of stopping to speak to the gate men that his father had never had. His father was still alive. That was the strangeness of it, and it lay under everything that followed like a stone under thin grass. King Alaric had not died. He had abdicated, laid the crown down at the end of a long, gray, exhausted winter, on the advice of physicians who told him plainly that his heart would not carry another year of the work. He went out to Harrowgate, the old house on the downs, with a nurse and a dog and 40 years of state papers he would never read again, and he left the realm to his son. It was the right thing, and it was done rightly, and no one, so far as I know, ever heard him complain of it. But an abdicated king leaves things behind him, among them a wife. Queen Consort Morwenna had married King Alaric 11 years earlier, and in those 11 years she had gathered the household into her hands the way a woman gathers reins. She held the appointment of the upper staff. She held the honors list. She held, through her son by an earlier marriage, Lord Cassius, keeper of the privy purse, the money that ran the Palace of Harrowgate from its stables to its still-room. She had done it patiently, while an old king grew tired, and so quietly that half the realm still thought of her as a decoration on Alaric's arm. She was not a decoration. I had held gates for her for 11 years, and I knew what she was. She was a woman who never raised her voice at a man she could ruin, and never lowered it at a man she could not. And now Alaric was gone to Harrowgate, Rowan wore the crown, and Morwenna was still in the east wing with her rooms and her jewels and her son, and every one of us in that building could feel the weather changing. The whole trouble can be told in one sentence. On the morning after the accession supper, King Rowan was to sign the instrument of settlement. I am no lawyer. What everyone below stairs understood of it, because the palace hears everything, was this. The instrument returned the late Queen Isolde's estate to her children, King Rowan and Princess Alara, and took it out of the hands into which it had drifted. It ended the consort's appointment of the upper staff. It removed Lord Cassius from the privy purse and put the accounts under the chancellor and the courts. It took the reins out of Morwenna's hands and gave them back to the crown, with a stroke of a pen at 10 o'clock in the morning, in the long gallery. She had known about it for 9 days. Everybody knew she had known, because on the day she was told she walked from the Chancellor's office to her own with her chin up and her back straight, and did not speak to a single soul on the way, and a woman like that does not fall silent because she is content. That night, the night of the accession supper, I had the Armoury Gate. It is not a grand post. The Armoury Gate is an iron door at the bottom of the east wing, opening onto a stone passage that runs up under the chapel stair to the private floor. Nobody photographs the Armoury Gate. No crowds, no railings, no tourists with their phones up. There is a lamp, a bell, a step worn into a shallow dish by 400 years of boots, and a lectern where the watch book lies open. I liked it. A man of my age likes a quiet gate. The watch book is the thing you must understand, because everything turned on it in the end. It is a ledger bound in gray board, and it lives on that lectern under a brass chain. Every man who holds the Armoury Gate writes in it the hour he takes the post and the hour he leaves it, the state of the door, and every person who passes through in either direction, with the time to the minute. Cook or chancellor, scullery maid or queen, every soul who passes an inner gate of Harrowgate is written down by the man standing at it. Why? Because guards get blamed. That is the whole of the reason, and there is no prettier one. A brooch goes missing from an upstairs room, and the first question asked is not who wanted it, but who was standing nearest the door. 160 years ago, a guardsman of this company was hanged for a theft he did not do, on the word of a marquis who did, and the company has never forgotten it. So we write everything down, every man, every hour, every minute, in ink. The watch book is not the household's book. It is ours. And under every page of that book there is a second page. The watch book is made in the old style, with a sheet of carbon laid between the leaf and a thinner leaf beneath it, and the thin leaf is not loose. It is stitched into the spine, sewn in at the fold so that it cannot be lifted out without cutting the binding to pieces. When you write on the top page, you write on the undercopy too, whether you like it or not. The top pages are torn out at the end of each month and handed up to the household, and the household files them and forgets them. The undercopies stay in the spine. Once a year, on the company's founding day, the regimental sergeant major cuts the old spine open before witnesses, and the company reads its own year back to itself, and then the spine is sealed and stored. I had written in that book for 11 years and never once thought about the undercopy. It was simply how the book was made. Old men make things that way, and young men use them without asking why, and then one night in your life you find out why. At 11:07 by the gate clock, Queen Consort Morwenna came through the Armoury Gate and went up. I remember it exactly, and I remember it plainly because there was nothing to remember. She wore dark green and a rope of pearls, and she carried her own shawl, which was unusual. She generally had someone to carry things. She did not look at me. People of that rank do not look at gate men. We are furniture that salutes. I came to attention. She passed, and her heels went away up the stone passage toward the chapel stair, and I turned back to the lectern and I wrote 23:07 HM the Queen Consort inward ascending. 12 words in ink in my own hand. 12 words that a woman would one day spend a great deal of money trying to destroy. At 11:13 there was a sound above me. I have tried many times to describe that sound, and I cannot do it. It was not a scream, and it was not a crash. It was a short, muffled, tumbling knock, 3 or 4 beats of it, the way a heavy thing sounds when it goes down stone in the dark, and then nothing, and then a woman's voice calling for help, high and quite steady. I do not remember deciding to move. I remember the watch book open under my hand, and then I remember being at the foot of the chapel stair with my rifle slung and the lamp swinging, and King Rowan lying on the flags in his shirt sleeves with his coat half off one shoulder and blood in his hair and his eyes shut. The chapel stair is a spiral of gray stone with a rope handrail and 22 steps. He had come down most of them. Above him, 4 steps up, Queen Consort Morwenna was kneeling with her skirt spread across the tread. "He slipped," she said. "Sergeant, help me, he slipped. He missed the step. I heard him fall. I came at once." I did not answer her. I put 2 fingers under the king's jaw and found the pulse there, thin and quick but there, and I shouted down the passage for the guardroom, and I heard Perrin Lyle's boots start and heard him bawling for the surgeon. And then, because there was nothing else I could do until they came, I knelt on the cold flags and held the King of Eldermore's head still with my 2 white gloves so that he could not turn it, and I looked up the stair. And I want to be exact here, because a man's whole life can hang on what he noticed in 10 seconds when he was not trying to notice anything. I noticed that her breathing was even. I had come 30 paces at a dead run, and I was blowing like a bellows. She had, by her own account, heard a man fall down a stone stair, run to him, and knelt there in terror for perhaps 40 seconds, and her breath was as even as a woman reading in a chair. I noticed the shawl was gone. She had carried a shawl through my gate at 11:07, and she did not have it now, and I never saw it again, not that night, not ever, and no one ever produced it. And I noticed the ring. It lay on the 3rd tread from the bottom, in the shadow at the back of the step where the stone was worn hollow. The king's signet, the great old ring of the House of Harrowgate, with the heart's head cut into the bloodstone. It had come off his hand as he went down, and rolled and lodged there. With the lamp swinging and the surgeon's people coming and a king bleeding on the flags, I do not believe another living soul saw it. I did a foolish thing, or a wise one. I have never settled it. I took it up and put it inside my glove in my palm and closed my hand. Then the surgeon came, and Major Kirk came, and the corridor filled with people, and they took King Rowan up to his rooms on a board with 4 men steadying it, and Morwenna went with them, weeping now, very softly, into a handkerchief, and somebody said what a mercy it was that Her Majesty had been passing. I went back down to my gate. The watch book lay open where I had left it. My hand was shaking. I made myself stand at the lectern until it stopped, and then I picked up the pen and I wrote. 2313 Alarm, H.M. The king found at foot of Chapel Stair, injured. H.M. the Queen Consort present. Surgeon summoned 2314. Post left 2313, resumed 2331. C. Wren, S.G.T. And then, because the entry above it had smudged where my sleeve had dragged across the wet ink when I ran, and because a smudged line in a watch book is a fault, and I have been faulted for less, I went over the 4 smudged figures of my earlier entry with the pen carefully so that they could be read. Asterisk 2307. That small, honest, stupid act of tidiness nearly hanged me. By noon the next day the palace had a story, and it was a good one, and most of the people who told it believed it. His Majesty had risen from the accession supper, gone up alone, missed his footing on the chapel stair, which is old and worn, and unlit past the 2nd landing when the sconces are down, and fallen. Her Majesty the Queen Consort, going up to her own rooms, had heard him, come at once, called for help and stayed with him. He had struck his head. He was concussed. The physicians were hopeful. The realm was asked for its prayers, and the realm gave them. And there was a second thing that came out that day, and almost nobody noticed it, because it was in no newspaper at all. It was on a slip of paper on the board in the guardroom. The corridor cameras of the East Wing had been out of service since the 9th. All of them, the chapel stair head, the chapel stair foot, the east landing, the passage, the private floor lobby. Every eye in that wing had been dark for 6 days, on a maintenance order for cable replacement. I stood and read that slip 3 times. Then I went down the corridor to the signals room, and I asked Ferris Croom, who ran it, when the order had been raised. "The 9th, he said, not looking at me. "Who signed it?" He looked at me then. He was a soft, tidy, frightened man of about 50 who had worked in that room for half his life, and had never once been asked a question he did not want to answer. He had a mug of tea going cold at his elbow, and his hands flat on the desk on either side of it. "Sergeant," he said, "I only do what the paper says." "Who signed it, Mr. Croom?" He turned the order around on the desk with one finger so that I could read it. He did not say the name out loud, and he did not have to. "Cassius, keeper of the privy purse." I thanked him and went out and stood in the passage, and felt the whole building lean over me. Because here is what no one outside the company knew, and what Lord Cassius, who had signed an order to blind every camera in the East Wing, did not know either. The household's cameras were not the only ones. We had our own. Under the guardroom of Harrowgate, down 11 steps, there is a vaulted room with a stone floor and a smell of oil and old wool that we call the watch room. It holds the arms racks, the key press, the company's colors in their case, and on a bench along the north wall 2 machines. They are ugly things and not modern. Steel drums the size of a beer cask, turned by a clockwork motor, taking the feed from 6 cameras and writing it onto a magnetic band that winds off one drum and onto another. Every band carries, pressed into its edge by a little wheel, the reading of a mechanical counter, a number that ticks up 1 every second the drum turns and can never tick back. 2 machines, the first which records, the second its sister which copies from the first, band to band, stamping the copy with the same counter reading as it goes, so that any copy can be laid against the machine and proved. The company installed them 31 years ago, out of its own funds, after a guardsman was accused by a viscount's son of striking him at the Salaport, and had nothing but his word to set against a lord's, and lost. Twice since, the household has proposed to remove them as an unnecessary duplication. Twice, the regimental sergeant major of the day has answered that the company will keep its own record, and the household has found something else to do. The watch room's 6 cameras cover the 6 inner gates and the stairs that serve them. One of them looks down the chapel stair from the little iron bracket above the chapel door. It was not on the household system, it was on ours. It had never been touched by any maintenance order, because Lord Cassius, keeper of the privy purse, did not know it existed. I did not go down that night. A braver man would have gone down at once, and I have wondered ever since what would have been different if I had. I went down at 4 in the afternoon of the second day, and I took Guardsman Perrin Lyle with me, because I did not want to be alone with whatever was on that band, and because Lyle was 23 and I have never met a straighter one. The key to the watchroom press hangs on the sergeant of the gate's belt. That was mine. We ran the band back to the 11th hour of the night of the accession supper, set the drum turning, and watched the little gray square of the screen. I will describe what we saw once, and then I will not describe it again. The picture is from above and behind, from the bracket over the chapel door, so that you see the head of the chapel stair and the first few treads and then the dark. It is gray and grainy, and there is no sound at all. At the counter reading that answers to 7 minutes past 11, a figure comes into the top of the frame from the left and stops and stands. She is there for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. She does not move much. Once she puts a hand up to her throat. At 11 minutes past, a second figure comes into the frame from the right. A man in shirt sleeves, his coat over one arm, walking the way a tired man walks. He stops. They face each other at the head of the stair. He puts a hand out, palm up. I have watched that gesture 200 times, and I have never been able to make it mean anything but please asterisk, and she does not take it. They stand like that for a minute and a half. Then he turns to go down. And she moves. It is one movement, and it is quick, and it is over before the eye is ready for it, and then the man is not there anymore. The frame shows only the dark at the top of the steps, and a woman standing at the head of them with both hands at her sides. She stands there for 11 seconds. I counted them. 11 seconds while a man lies at the bottom of a stone stair and she does not go down. Then she stoops, and gathers up something from the floor, a pale thing, cloth, the shawl, and she puts it over her arm, and she goes down out of frame. And 11 seconds after that her mouth opens and you understand, though you cannot hear it, that she has begun to call for help. Perrin Lyle sat down on the bench. He did not do it deliberately. His legs put him there. "Sergeant," he said, "that's the Queen." "Yes." "That's the Queen asterisk." "Yes," I said, and my own voice came out of me strange and flat and far away, and I stopped the drum, and I stood in that cold vaulted room with the smell of gun oil in my nose, and I understood, with a clarity I have never had before or since, that my life as I had lived it up to that afternoon was over, and that everything after it would be a matter of choosing which way it ended. I did the correct thing. I want that on the record, because I did a great many incorrect things afterwards, and the company should know that I began properly. I reported it in writing, up the chain, within the hour, and carried it myself to Major Ansel Kirk, who commanded us. Major Kirk was a decent man. I want that on the record too, because he did me a great deal of harm, and he did it, I think, believing he was holding the roof up over all our heads. He read my sheet twice. He set it down. He went to the window and stood with his hands behind his back for long enough that I heard the clock on his mantel do a full minute. "Wren," he said, "who has seen this?" "Lyle and myself, sir." "Nobody else?" "Nobody else, sir." "Then you will say nothing to anyone. Not to your section, not to the sergeant major, not to your daughter, not to your priest. You will bring the band to me, and I will bring it to the Lord Chamberlain, and the Lord Chamberlain will bring it where it must go, and it will be dealt with properly by people whose business it is, and not by a sergeant of the gate. Do you understand me?" "Sir." "Say that you understand me." "I understand you, sir." He turned around then and he looked at me, and his face was gray. "Cadan," he said, he had never used my name in 9 years, "if what you say is on that band, then the woman at the head of this household put a king down a flight of stone stairs 3 days after his crowning. Do you know what that does to a country? Do you know what it does to us? The guard were on the doors, the guard were on the stair. Whatever else comes out of this, they will say we let it happen, and they will not be wrong." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Bring me the band. Let the proper people carry it. That is not cowardice. That is the chain of command. And the chain of command is the only thing that has ever stood between men like you and me and a mob." I said, "Sir." And I went down to the watch room, and I took the band off the drum, and I put it in a canvas bag, and I sealed the bag with the company's seal and signed across the seal. And before I did any of that, I put the sister machine in circuit, and I copied it. It took 41 minutes. I sat on a bench in a cold cellar watching a steel drum turn, and I do not think I thought about a single thing the whole time. When it was done, I took the copy off, wrote the counter reading on the spool with a grease pencil, put it in a tin, and put the tin behind the third stone from the corner of the watch room wall, where the mortar has been out since the flood of my grandfather's day, and where every sergeant of the gate for 3 generations has kept his tobacco. I did not have a plan. I want to be exact about that. I had no intention, at 4 o'clock that afternoon, of doing anything with that copy at all. I did what a man does who has spent his working life at a gate and has learned one lesson above all others, which is this: things that go up the chain do not always come down it. I made a copy because I did not trust the palace with the only one. That is the whole of my crime, and I have never dressed it up any finer than that. The band went up to Major Kirk at 5:30. Major Kirk logged it and carried it to the Lord Chamberlain's office at 6. The Lord Chamberlain, Aldous Crewe, was not there. His secretary took receipt of it and signed for it, and the signature on the receipt, when it was read out in court 11 weeks later, was not the secretary's. It was Lord Cassius's. The keeper of the privy purse had happened, at 6 o'clock in the evening, to be in the Lord Chamberlain's outer office. He had happened to see a sealed company bag come in. He had, he said afterwards, signed for it as a courtesy, being the senior man present, and had left it on the chamberlain's desk. The Lord Chamberlain never saw it. The bag was never seen again by any man who would swear to it. A search was made, the chamberlain's office, the registry, the controller's strong room, and a note was placed on the file to the effect that the item appeared to have been mislaid in the confusion following His Majesty's accident. Mislaid. 4 days from my hand to nothing. I said I would count things out in order, and I have got ahead of myself, because between the band going up and the band vanishing there was one afternoon that I have thought about more than any other, and it is the afternoon I gave the king his ring back. He was awake by then, he was not well. They had him in a darkened room on the private floor with the curtains half drawn, and he had a dressing on the back of his head, and a look about the eyes like a man surfacing from deep water, and the physicians would let him sit up for 1 hour in the afternoon and no more. He sent for me, not for the major, not for the sergeant major, for the sergeant who had knelt on the flags and held his head. I stood at the foot of his bed with my cap under my arm. "They tell me you got to me first," he said. His voice was slow. He had to find each word before he used it. "What do you remember?" And I told him. 11:07 and the shawl and the sound at 11:13 and the flags and the pulse under his jaw. And I told him her breathing had been even, and I watched his face while I said it, and his face did not change. "And this," I said, and I took the ring out of my pocket and put it in his hand. He looked at it a long while. He turned it over with his thumb. "Where?" "Third tread from the bottom, sir, at the back of the step. It had rolled." "Did you report it?" "No, sir. I meant to give it to you myself, and then there was everything else. It is on no list and in no report. Nobody knows it came off, sir, except you and me." He closed his hand around it. "Sergeant, tell me what you think happened on that stair." I said nothing. It was not a soldier's place to say. He watched me not saying it, and something went over his face that I have never forgotten, not surprise, recognition, and he shut his eyes and lay back on the pillows. "I can't remember," he said. "That's the thing they don't put in the bulletins. I remember going up. I remember the taste of the wine at supper. And then I remember your gloves, Sergeant, on either side of my head, and your face saying, 'Don't move, sir,' asterisk, and nothing at all in between. It isn't dark. It isn't asterisk anything asterisk. There's a piece of my life the size of 10 minutes and someone has taken it out, and I cannot get it back." He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. "So I am the only witness," he said, "and I am no witness at all." And he thanked me and dismissed me, and I went back to my gate. 2 days later, I heard that the band was mislaid, and I went down into the watch room and stood in front of the third stone from the corner for a long time, and did not touch it. The household inquiry was announced on the 6th day, and it was a handsome thing on paper. 3 commissioners, powers to call any member of the household, a promise of a full report to His Majesty and to the Council. It was chaired by the Lord Chamberlain, who was 74 and tired. Its secretary was appointed by the Controller's office, and the Controller's office answered to the Keeper of the Privy Purse, and the Keeper of the Privy Purse was Lord Cassius, and Lord Cassius was Queen Consort Morwenna's son. They took my evidence on the 11th day, in a room with a long table, and they were polite, and they wrote it all down. I told them about 11:07. I told them about the shawl. I told them about the even breathing. I told them about the band I had made and reported and surrendered, and the commissioner on the left, a courteous, well-fed man named Bantry, folded his hands and said, "Sergeant, we have been unable to trace any such recording. Is it possible you are thinking of the household cameras, which as you know were out of service?" "No, sir, the company keeps its own. I ran the band myself. Guardsman Lyle was with me." "Guardsman Lyle," said Bantry. gave evidence to us on Tuesday and could not recall the content of any recording with any certainty. I sat very still. Then Guardsman Lyle, I said, has been spoken to. That is a serious thing to say, Sergeant. Yes, sir, it is. Perrin Lyle was posted to the coast garrison the following week. His mother had been ill for 2 years. The household had been so kind as to arrange for her care at a hospice near his new station, at no cost to him. He wrote to me once. It was 4 lines long, and he asked me to forgive him, and I wrote back and told him there was nothing to forgive, and I meant it, and I mean it still. He was 23, and they showed him his mother. That is how it is done. Nobody threatens anybody. Somebody simply arranges a kindness that cannot be refused, and then the kindness stands in the room between you and the truth for the rest of your life. They did not have a kindness for me, so they tried a reward. It came from Lord Cassius himself, which surprised me. I had expected an underling. He sent for me to his office in the controller's wing, and he had tea brought, and he was charming, and he was very good at it. He was a handsome man of about 40 with his mother's stillness and none of her patience. He had a fountain pen he turned over and over in his fingers the whole time he spoke. Sergeant Wren, he said, 22 years, your father in the company before you and his father. There is a vacancy coming at the yeoman warders. It carries a house on the green, a pension at the higher rate, and it is, frankly, a great deal easier on the knees than a stone gate in January. He smiled at me over the pen. You have a daughter, I think, in the still room. I have, sir. Nell, isn't it? He said it kindly. He said it exactly as kindly as it needed to be said. A steady girl, by all accounts. The still room is a hard place to get on in. The housekeeper's post will fall vacant in 3 or 4 years, and it does no harm for the controller's office to have a name in mind. He put the pen down. What everyone in this building wants now, he said, is a line drawn under an accident and a young king on his feet and a quiet summer. I am told you have been telling the commissioners a story about a recording. I am told there is no recording. I want you to think very carefully about how much of what you believe you saw asterisk at 4 in the afternoon in a cellar on a machine 30 years old, 3 days after you had knelt in the blood of a man you are sworn to die for. He spread his hands. Grief plays tricks. Loyalty plays worse ones. No one thinks the less of you. I set my cup down on his desk untouched. It rattled slightly, and I was angry with myself for that. My lord, I said, may I ask you one question? By all means. Why did the maintenance order for the East Wing cameras carry your signature, and not the controller's? The pen stopped turning. It was the only time in the whole affair that I saw a crack in any of them, and it lasted less than a second. And then he laughed and said that a keeper of the privy purse signs 300 things a week and remembers none of them, and asked whether I would like sugar. I went out of that office knowing 2 things, that they had no idea I had made a copy, and that they were going to bury me. I had 4 weeks then, and I used them. I am not a detective, and I never pretended to be one. What I am is a man who has stood at doors for 22 years, and the thing about standing at doors is that the whole world walks past you and forgets you are there, and if you are patient, you can learn a great deal about a house from its footsteps. I found the pearl first. Or rather, it found me. A housemaid named Tilda Fenn had swept the chapel stair on the morning after and had found a pearl in the joint between the 4th tread and the wall, and had done what a frightened girl of 19 does, which is put it in her apron pocket and say nothing to anybody for a month. She gave it to me in the laundry passage with her hands shaking, and she said, "Sergeant, I never took it. I found asterisk it." And then she cried. I asked her whether the Queen Consort had worn her pearls since. She had not. The rope had gone out to a jeweler's in the town on the 2nd day, for restringing, and come back on the 7th. The girls in the East Wing talk about nothing else but what goes out and what comes back. A rope of pearls does not want restringing 3 days after a coronation, unless something has pulled at it hard. I found Ferris Croom next. I went to his house, a narrow one on Coulter Row, with a garden the size of a table, and he opened the door and looked at me and did not even pretend. "You've come about the 9th," he said. He let me in and sat down at his own kitchen table like a man being sentenced. The maintenance order, he told me, had been raised on the *14th*, 5 days after the accident. It had been backdated to the 9th in his own hand, at the instruction of Lord Cassius's private secretary, who had stood over him while he did it, and had taken the original away. The East Wing cameras had been working perfectly well on the night of the accession supper. They had recorded everything, and on the morning of the 14th, Croom had been ordered to run the East Wing drives back and excise the whole of that night, and he had done it, because he had 2 grandchildren and a mortgage and a keeper of the privy purse standing in his doorway. "I've been sick every morning for 5 weeks," he said. "My wife thinks it's my stomach." "Mr. Croom," I said, "will you say that to a court?" He looked at me for a long time with his hands flat on the table. "If you can get me into a court," he said, "and if there is one man in it who isn't theirs, yes. God help me, yes." And the last one was Elias Dunnock, and Elias Dunnock was the one who nearly broke me. He was an underfootman, 19 years old, sent up on the night of the accession supper to see to the fire in the king's sitting room. He had come out onto the private floor landing at the head of the chapel stair, and had seen the Queen Consort standing there in the dark, and she had turned and seen him, and he had bowed and gone away down the back stairs with his heart in his throat, because you do not blunder into the presence like that. He was on that landing 4 or 5 minutes before it happened. He was the only human being alive who could put her at the head of that stair before she said she was there. He was on a boat within 9 days, a place with the realm's legation overseas, a great honor for a boy of 19, 150 crowns for his outfit, and a letter of character signed by the controller. His mother told me all of this on her doorstep with enormous pride, and gave me his address, and asked whether I would like to see his letters. I wrote to Elias Dunnock 4 times. He did not answer any of them. That was the state of it on the 40th day. A copy in a tin behind a stone, a pearl in a matchbox, a backdated order, a signals officer who would speak if I could get him a court, a boy across the sea who would not, a young guardsman on the coast who could not, and a watch book with 12 words in it in my own hand. And no court. There was no court, and there was never going to be one, because the only body entitled to accuse the consort of a king was the crown, and the crown was a concussed young man in a darkened room whose household was being run by the accused woman's son. I want to say that I saw it clearly and acted. I did not. I sat on it for 11 more days like a man with a live shell in his lap, and I went to my gate, and I saluted her when she passed, because she did pass twice, and I stood at attention and saluted, and she did not look at me, and I went home and did not sleep. Then King Rowan sent for me a second time. It was the middle of the afternoon, and he was up and dressed, and he stood at the window in his shirt sleeves with the light coming in over the stable roofs, and he had the look of a man who has been thinking one thought for a fortnight. "Sit down, Sergeant." "I'd rather stand, sir." "Yes," he said, "so would I." He didn't sit either. "I've been remembering." He turned the signet ring on his finger while he spoke. He never once stopped turning it. "Not the fall. I don't think that will ever come back, but before it. I remember coming up the passage and being tired and wanting my bed. I remember she was at the top and I was surprised because she has her own stair. I remember she said, 'You needn't sign it, Rowan, not tomorrow, not ever. It costs you nothing to leave things as they are.' And I remember I said," he stopped. He looked at the ring. "I said, 'It costs me everything.' And I put my hand out to her because she has been in my father's house for 11 years and I am not a cruel man and I did not want to destroy her. I wanted her to stand aside and take a pension and go, and I put my hand out." He was quiet for a moment. "And she didn't take it," he said. And then I remember nothing, and then I remember your gloves." He turned from the window. "Sergeant Wren, I am going to ask you for something, and I want you to understand that I am asking, not ordering, and that if you refuse me, I will not hold it against you, now or ever, on my word as a king and as a man." "Sir, let it lie." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below in the yard, a horse was being walked, and its shoes went clip, clip, clip on the cobbles. "My father is at Harrowgate," he said. "His heart is failing. The physicians give him a year, perhaps 2, if he is kept quiet. If I put her in a dock, I will be telling a dying man that the woman he has slept beside for 11 years put his son down a stone stair. It will kill him, Sergeant, not as a figure of speech. It will kill him, and I will have done it." He came a step nearer. "And it is not only him. I am 11 weeks a king. If I begin my reign by trying my father's wife for attempting my life, the realm will remember nothing else about me for 40 years. Half the newspapers will say I invented it to seize my stepmother's money, and there will be no answer to it, because the only witness is a man who cannot remember and a sergeant who is loyal to me, and she has already lost. The instrument is signed. She is powerless. She will be gone to the country inside a month. She will never set foot in this building again. I have won everything a trial could win me. Why should I burn my father alive to have it said out loud?" And then he said the thing that I carried around inside me like a stone for 11 days and 11 nights. "I am not asking you to lie. I am asking you to be silent. You have been silent for 22 years, Sergeant. It is what you do." I did not answer him at once. I stood there and looked at the young king of Eldermore, who was a good man, and who was right about nearly everything he had just said, and who was asking me, kindly, honestly, with his hand out, exactly as he had put it out to her at the head of that stair, to bury the truth in a hole and stand on it for the rest of my life. And I thought of Perrin Lyle's 4-line letter, and of Ferris Croom being sick every morning, and of Tilda Fenn crying in the laundry passage because she had found a pearl and thought they would hang her for it, and of Elias Dunnock, 19 years old, on a boat. "Sir," I said, "may I have a night?" "You may have as many as you like. One will do." My daughter Nell was 19 that spring, and she worked in the palace stillroom, and she came to my rooms on her half-day the way she always did, and cooked me a supper I did not want and ate most of it herself. Her mother has been dead 8 years. Nell has her mother's habit of talking while she works and not looking at you, which is a mercy, because it lets a man keep his face to himself. She talked about the head stillroom maid, who was a tyrant and a delivery of bad lemons. And then she said, without any change of tone at all, "You've gone thin, duh." "I'm well enough." "You've gone thin, and you don't sleep, and you've been down that cellar 3 times a week since the king fell." She scraped the pan out. "Everybody in this palace knows something, and nobody in it will say what. And you're the worst of the lot because you never could lie. You just go quiet and stand up straighter, and you've been standing like a fence post for 6 weeks. I said nothing. She put the pan down and turned round and leaned against the sink with her arms folded, and she looked so like her mother that it went through me like a bayonet. "When I was small," she said, "and I broke Gran's blue jug, do you remember what you did?" "I remember you told me." "I told you because I was scared of you finding out. And you sat me down and you said, 'I can hear you say it,' you said, 'Nell, a thing that's true doesn't stop being true because nobody says it. It just gets heavier.' And then you made me tell Gran, and Gran shouted at me for 10 minutes, and then it was over. And I have never in my life forgotten it, and I have wondered lately whether you have." She picked up her coat. "I don't know what it is," she said at the door. "I don't want to know, but whatever it is, it's getting heavier, and you're the one carrying it, and nobody asked you to carry it forever." Then she kissed my head and went back to her lemons. I sat in that room until 2 in the morning, and somewhere in those hours I stopped asking what would happen to King Alaric, and to the reign, and to the company, and to Nell, and to me, and started asking a much smaller and much harder question. If I say nothing, then a woman who put a man down a stone stair goes to a country house with her jewels and her name and her son, and Ferris Croom is sick every morning for the rest of his life, and Perrin Lyle's mother dies comfortably in a hospice that was bought with his silence, and Tilda Fenn thinks she is a thief, and Elias Dunnock never comes home, and the 12 words in my watch book, H.M. the Queen Consort, inward, ascending, sit in a spine in a cellar and mean nothing at all. And what then is the guard for? We do not guard the king. That is what people think, and it is not true. 100 men with rifles could guard a king better than a company in bearskins. We guard the asterisk idea that there is something in this realm that cannot be bought, moved, frightened, or bargained with. That is what the tunic is. And if the tunic can be bought with a house on the green and a place for my daughter, then it is a suit of red cloth and nothing else. My father wore it for nothing. His father wore it for nothing. And I have stood 22 years at a gate guarding an empty room. I made my choice at about 2:15, and once it was made, I was so tired that I slept 9 hours, which is the only strange thing in this whole account that I have never been able to explain. Now I must be careful, because this is the part that everyone thinks they know, and everyone has it wrong. I did not go to a newspaper, not first and not for money and not to be famous, and God knows not to be loved. On the following morning, I went to the Justiciar's office at Aldergate and lodged a sworn information under the Public Wrongs Act, which any subject of the realm may do, and which I had spent the previous evening reading about in a borrowed book with a dictionary at my elbow. With it I lodged in a sealed and numbered box the copy from behind the third stone, the pearl in its matchbox, the sworn statement of Ferris Croom, signed and witnessed at his kitchen table, the statement of Tilda Fenn, my own account of the night, and a note of where Elias Dunnock was and what he had seen. I did not lodge the watch book because the watch book was not mine. It was the company's. I noted its existence and where it was kept, and asked the Justiciar's office to send for it. The clerk who took the box was about 25, and he read the summary and went white and left the room and came back with an older man, and the older man read it and went out and came back with a man older still, and the third man asked me, very quietly, whether I understood what I was doing. Yes, I said. Sergeant, if this is false, you will go to prison for a very long time. Yes. And if it is true, he said, you may go to prison anyway. Yes, I said, I know. He gave me a receipt. I have it yet. And then I did the second thing, and this is the thing they hanged round my neck. I went from Aldergate to a narrow office above a printer's in Cobb Street, and I asked to see Hesper Fane, who is the editor of the *Eldermore Chronicle, and who is the least charming woman I have ever met, and the only one in that trade I would have trusted with a bootlace. I put a sealed packet on her desk. It held a second copy of the recording, made on the sister machine, and copies of the statements. I don't want money, I said. I don't want my name in your paper. I want you to put that in your safe and not open it. She looked at the packet, she looked at me. Then why bring it? Because I have lodged the same evidence with the Justiciar's office this morning, and I have watched what happens in that building to things that go up. If a proceeding is opened within 7 days, you will burn that packet unopened, and I will never trouble you again. If 7 days go by and nothing is opened, then it will not be buried, and you will know why, and you may do as you see fit. She sat back. Sergeant, she said, do you know what you're handing me? I know exactly what I am handing you, madam. I am handing you the end of my life. I would be obliged if you would keep it in the safe. 7 days. I have been asked 100 times since why 7, and the honest answer is that I picked a number out of the air like a fool. On the second day, the Justiciar's office asked the household for the watch book. The household replied that the relevant month's pages had been sent to the registry and could not immediately be located. On the third day, Lord Cassius applied to the justiciar to have the information struck out as vexatious, on the grounds that its author was a serving guardsman with a grievance who had been passed over for the yeoman warders. I had not applied for the yeoman warders. There was a letter in the controller's file saying I had. On the 5th day, I was suspended from duty and confined to the married quarter, and 2 men of the household police came and turned my rooms over and took away my letters and my father's medals, and a photograph of my wife. On the 6th day, the household inquiry published its report, 41 pages. It found that His Majesty had suffered an accidental fall on a worn and badly lit stair, that Her Majesty the Queen Consort's conduct had been exemplary, and the realm owed her its thanks, that the failure of the East Wing cameras was an unhappy coincidence of routine maintenance, and that certain irresponsible rumors within the household appeared to originate from a single member of the King's Guard, whose conduct was referred to as commanding officer for disciplinary action. It recommended that the Chapel Stair be relit. I read it in my own kitchen, suspended under guard with my father's medals gone out of the drawer, and I laughed until I had to sit down, and then I stopped laughing. On the 7th day, Hesper Fane opened the packet. On the 8th, the Eldermore Chronicle printed. I cannot give you what happened next, because I was not in it. I was in 3 rooms in a married quarter with a household policeman on the step, and I heard the realm come apart through a wall. They printed 6 frames. 6 gray squares from a 31-year-old drum, a woman at the head of a stair, a man in shirt sleeves with his hand out, the 2 of them facing, the head of the stair empty and the woman standing at it with her hands at her sides, the woman stooping for a shawl, the woman with her mouth open calling. Under them the counter readings. Beside them the sworn statement of a signals officer ordered to erase a night, and the 12 words of a watch book, and the plain, flat account of a sergeant of the gate. The Chronicle did not shout. That was the thing about Hesper Fane. It gave the 6 frames and the documents and 1 paragraph of editorial, and the paragraph asked a single question. If this is an accident, why was a man ordered to erase the record of it? By noon there were 4,000 people in the square outside the gates. By evening the council had been summoned. 2 commissioners of the household inquiry resigned before midnight. The 3rd, Bantry, gave an interview saying he had never been shown a recording, which was true, and which finished the Lord Chamberlain, who had never been shown one either and had signed the report anyway. And at 6:30 in the morning on the 9th day they arrested me. Theft of crown property, removal of a protected record, communication of household matter to an unauthorized person, contrary to the Household Secrets Act, which carries 10 years. They came with a warrant and 4 men, and they were embarrassed, and one of them was a corporal I had trained, and he could not do the strap of my own kit bag because his hands were shaking. "Corporal," I said, "it's all right, son, do your job." They took me out through the yard, past the guardroom, and the company was standing there. Not paraded, just standing in 1s and 2s in shirt sleeves in the cold because word had gone round. Nobody said anything. Nobody was permitted to. But as I came past the guardroom door, Regimental Sergeant Major Godric Stane came out of it, and he was in his tunic, and he stopped, and he came to attention, and he saluted me. He held it until the wagon door shut. They dismissed Nell from the still room that afternoon. Insubordination. She had thrown a jug of lemons at the head still-room maid, which was not true, and which she has never once denied, and which I have never asked her about. The trial opened 11 weeks later in the Court of the King's Bench at Aldergate Hall, before the Lord Justiciar, Tobin Aske, and it was 2 trials rammed into one. In the first, the Crown proceeded against Morwenna, Queen Consort, upon an information charging that she did unlawfully, and with intent cause grievous injury to the person of the sovereign, and against Cassius, Lord Cassius, keeper of the privy purse, upon informations charging perversion of the public record and the suborning of witnesses. In the second, the Crown proceeded against Cadan Wren, sergeant, upon informations charging theft and breach of the Household Secrets Act. They were joined on the application of Sergeant Havel Grieve, who appeared for the consort. He wanted them joined. He wanted it very badly, and I understood why the moment he stood up. Because his defense was not that she had not done it. His defense was *me*. If the sergeant is a thief, if the sergeant is a forger, if the sergeant is a bitter man passed over for promotion who doctored his own logbook, sat for 6 weeks brooding in a cellar, and then sold a doctored film to a newspaper, then everything that comes out of the sergeant is poison, and the 6 gray frames are poison, and the pearl is poison, and there is no case, and a woman goes home. Destroy the guard, and the crown of the whole thing falls in. He very nearly did it. He had me in the box for 2 days. Sergeant, you made a copy of a protected recording without authority. Yes. You concealed it behind a stone in a wall. Yes. For 6 weeks, in which time you told no officer, no commissioner, and no court that it existed. That is true. You removed the king's signet ring from the scene of his fall and put it in your glove. I did. You did not report it, not that night, not in writing, not ever. No, I gave it back to His Majesty with my own hand. So you say, there is no record of it, there is no witness to it. He turned to the court with his hands open, a man bewildered by a mystery. A king's ring vanishes from a stair and reappears, allegedly, in a private interview, with no note, no receipt, no witness. Sergeant, is it not the truth that you took a valuable ring, and returned it weeks later only when you understood that you might be searched? No. Then let us take your watchbook. They brought it up. The month's top pages, retrieved at last from the registry, produced by the household with great ceremony after 11 weeks of not being able to find them. He held up the sheet with my hand on it, and he laid it before the court, and he asked the court to look at one entry, and the court looked, and I felt the whole room lean. 2307 HM the Queen Consort inward ascending. The 4 figures of the time were darker than every other mark on the page, blacker, heavier, gone over twice. You inked that over, Sergeant? Yes. You went back, said Sergeant Havel Grieve in the gentlest voice in the world, to an entry you had already made, and you wrote it again * in a heavier hand after His Majesty was carried up that stair. Did you not? Yes, it had smudged, You corrected the time *, Sergeant. You put Her Majesty at the head of that stair at 7 minutes past 11 because you needed her there, and then you built 6 weeks of a story on top of it. That is not true. It is the only * thing on this page that has been touched twice, he said, and you touched it. And there it was. 11 weeks of work, a signals officer's ruined nerves, a girl's pearl, 6 gray frames, all of it hanging from 12 words in a watch book, and the ink of the 4 figures at the head of them was blacker than the rest, and I had made it so myself with my own pen out of tidiness at 11:30 at night, with a king's blood drying on my gloves. Ferris Croom gave his evidence on the 4th day and gave it well, and Grieve took him apart in 40 minutes by the simple method of asking him, over and over, why a man of conscience had waited 5 weeks to grow one. And on the 5th day they brought Elias Dunnock home from across the sea, and put him in the box, and he stood there in a new coat with his hands gripping the rail, 19 years old, and Sergeant Havel Grieve asked him whether he had seen anybody at the head of the Chapel Stair on the night of the accession supper. And Elias Dunnock said, "No, sir." They adjourned at 4 o'clock, and my own counsel, Lady Rosaline Marr, came down to the cells and sat on the bench beside me and did not speak for a long time. "They will convict you," she said at last, "and they will acquit her. As it stands, Sergeant, on this evidence, before this court, she walks out of that door tomorrow week, and you go down for 10 years, and the 6 frames will be a forgery in every schoolbook in this realm for 100 years. I looked at the wall. Then we had better find something, I said, that I did not touch. There are 2 things in this world that I did not touch, and I had forgotten both of them, because they were so old and so ordinary that they had stopped being visible to me, the way the step at the Armoury Gate had stopped being visible after 11 years of standing on it. I remembered them at some hour of that night, lying on a cell bunk staring at a ceiling I had looked at for 11 weeks. I sent word to Lady Rosaline Marr at 6 in the morning. She was in the cells by 7 with her hat still on. "The spine," I said. "What spine?" So I told her how a watch book is made. The leaf, the carbon, the thin underleaf sewn into the fold. The top pages torn out monthly and sent up to the household. Those were the pages Grieve had been waving about, the pages that had spent 11 weeks in a registry controlled by the controller's office, the pages anybody might have got at. And beneath them, all that time, stitched into the binding of a gray ledger chained to a lectern at the Armoury Gate, the pressed carbon of every word I had ever written, which no man in the household had ever seen or asked for or known was there. "And the ink," she said slowly, "the re-inking, would that press through?" "No, madam. The carbon takes the first asterisk stroke. It's the pressure of the nib through the sheet. If you go back over a line on the top page a day later on a hard lectern with the leaf lying loose, it doesn't press. It can't." She sat down very suddenly on the bench. "So the undercopy," she said, "shows what you wrote at 7 minutes past 11, once, in the moment, and it shows the smudge. It shows the smudge, madam. If I dragged my sleeve through wet ink at 13 minutes past, it went through to the carbon with it." "And the other thing?" "The second thing," I said, "is a machine." They convened on the 9th day of the trial, and the court of the King's Bench at Aldergate Hall, a chamber of oak and stone that has heard 4 centuries of the realm's worst hours, was made to receive 2 objects. The first came in under the escort of 6 men of the Harrowgate Company in full uniform, and it took 4 of them to carry it, and they set it down on trestles below the bench with a boom that went up into the roof, the sister machine. A steel drum on a cast frame, 31 years old, oil black, with a hand-lettered brass plate on the housing that says Kink's Guard, Watch Room, not household property, which some sergeant of my grandfather's generation had screwed on in a temper, and nobody had ever dared take off. It had been under continuous company guard from the hour of my arrest. It had never left the cellar, never been in my hands or Hesper Fane's or any newspapers, and the band the Chronicle had printed from carried, pressed into its edge by a little wheel that has been turning since before King Rowan was born, a counter reading, a number. The court's engineer, a dry man named Purphy appointed by the justiciar and answerable to nobody, ran the machine for 2 hours in open court with the defense's own expert at his shoulder, and told the Lord Justiciar 3 things: that the counter is mechanical, sealed, and cannot be set back; that the band the Asterisk Chronicle had printed from was stamped by this machine, and could have been stamped by no other in the realm, because the wheel that stamps it is hand-cut, and its burrs are as particular as a thumbprint, and that the reading on that band placed its making at 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the 2nd day after the accession supper, before any inquiry, before any report, before any man in that palace had told me a single lie. "So the recording," said Lord Justiciar Aske, "is not a thing the sergeant made after he was aggrieved?" "My lord," said Purphy, "the recording is a thing the sergeant made 2 days after the king fell, on a machine that has not moved from its bench in 31 years, and I would stake my license on it." Sergeant Havel Grieve rose and asked 11 questions and sat down again, and he did not get anything, and everyone in that room knew he did not get anything, and for the first time in 11 weeks I saw his hand go up to straighten a wig that did not need straightening. And then they brought in the second object, which was a gray ledger. Regimental Sergeant Major Godric Stane took the book to the box himself. He is 61 and built like a door, and had never in his life been in a court, and he went up those steps as though onto a parade square, and when he took the oath his voice went round that chamber like a shot. Lady Rosaline Mar asked him what he had in his hands. The watch book of the Armoury Gate, my lady, the company's book. Not the household's. No, my lady. He said it with a flatness that made two men on the bench smile. It has never been the household's. She took him through the making of it, the carbon, the stitched underleaf, the monthly tearing out of the top sheets, the annual cutting of the spine before the assembled company, and asked who had held custody of that book since the night of the accession supper. The company, my lady. It has been chained to the lectern at the Armoury Gate or under my hand every hour of every day. Sergeant Wren has not touched it since the 5th day. He has been suspended, and then he has been in a cell. And has anyone opened the spine? No, my lady. It has never been opened out of season in the history of the company. I would not open it for a chamberlain, and I would not open it for a king. I will open it, he said, for a court. The Lord Justiciar said, "Then do so, Sergeant Major." He put the ledger on the rail of the witness box. He took out his clasp knife, which is company issue and older than I am, and he cut the stitching of the spine 3 long strokes, and a sound of thread parting that carried into every corner of that silent chamber, and he opened the binding back, and he drew out the underleaves, and he found the month and the day, and he handed the sheet down to the usher, and the usher carried it to the bench. The Lord Justiciar looked at it for a long time. Then he had it shown to Sergeant Havel Grieve, who looked at it for rather longer. On the pressed carbon of that page, in the ghost gray of a nib driven through a sheet of paper 11 weeks and 4 days before, was written 2307 HM the Queen Consort inward ascending. Written once. The figures light, even, ordinary, the same weight as every other stroke on the page, not gone over, not corrected, not touched. And running across the tail of the line was a smear, where a sleeve had dragged through wet ink at a dead run. "Sergeant Major," said Lady Rosaline Mar, "on the top sheet the figures of that time are heavily re-inked. On this, the copy taken at the instant of writing, they are not." "No, my lady." Which can only mean that the time on that sheet was written once, at the time, and darkened afterwards. It can mean nothing else, my lady. You cannot press ink through a sheet that isn't under the nib. That's not a matter of opinion. That's paper. Grieve did not cross-examine him, not one question. He sat down, and he put his hand flat on the table in front of him, and he left it there. She insisted on giving evidence. Her own counsel begged her not to. It was said afterwards that he threatened to withdraw. But Morwenna had sat for 9 days in that dock listening to a sergeant of the gate, and a signals clerk, and a still-room girl take her house apart, and she could not bear it. And on the 11th day she went into the box in dark green with her chin up. And she was, I will say it, magnificent, and she was believed by a good number of people in that gallery for a full hour. She spoke of an old and worn stair, and of a young man tired from a long night. She spoke of the terrible sound. She spoke of running, of running, she said, and finding him, and of her own hands, and of how she had shouted for help until her throat tore. And she spoke of me with pity, which was well done. A loyal, simple man, she said, who had loved his king and knelt in his blood and never got over it. A man who needed the fall to be somebody's fault, and who had found in a cellar in the dark a machine to make it so. And then Lady Rosaline Mar rose and asked her 4 questions. "Madam, when you reached His Majesty at the foot of the stair, you took his head in your hands." "I did." "You have described it to this court in detail, his face, his breathing, his hands." "His poor hands," she said. "Yes." "Tell the court about his hands." And she told them. And she was, I think, still inside her own performance, still hearing the gallery hold its breath, still a woman who had never in her life been contradicted by anybody, and she leaned forward and she said, "His hands were empty and open, and one of them was bare. His signet was asterisk gone, his father's ring and his grandfather's gone off his finger, and the mark of it still white on the skin. And I thought in that moment, God forgive them, they have robbed him where he lies." She said it beautifully. Nobody moved. Lady Rosaline Marr let it sit in that chamber for perhaps 5 seconds, and then she said, quite mildly, "Madam, the king's signet ring did not leave that stair." Morwenna's face did not change yet. It came off his hand as he fell, and it lodged in the hollow of the 3rd tread from the bottom, at the back of the step, in shadow. Sergeant Wren took it up with his glove and returned it to His Majesty privately, and no report was made, and no list records it, and no newspaper has ever printed it, and until 3 minutes ago no living soul outside this court knew that the king's hand was bare when he lay at the foot of that stair, except His Majesty, who cannot remember it, and Sergeant Wren, who found it. She turned the ring in her fingers. She had it in her hand the whole time. The king had sent it into court that morning by the hand of the regimental sergeant major. You were kneeling 4 steps above him, madam, in the dark, with his blood on the stone. And what you have just told this court you saw, the bare finger, the white mark on the skin, is a thing that can only be seen by a person who was looking at that hand before the ring rolled asterisk. She set the ring down on the rail, which is to say, while he was still coming down the stair. The silence in that chamber was not the silence of a crowd. It was the silence of 140 people all understanding one thing at once. "Madam," said Lady Rosaline Marr, "would you repeat your answer?" And Queen Consort Morwenna opened her mouth and shut it and looked at the ring on the rail of the witness box. And then, at last, after 11 weeks, she looked at me. I was in the dock across the chamber with a warder on either side, charged with theft, and she looked at me across 40 feet of oak with an expression I have never been able to name, and I gave her nothing at all because I had nothing to give her, and because it was not my place. I was a gate man. She had walked past me for 11 years. The Lord Justiciar said, "The witness will answer the question." She did not answer the question. She stood in the box for a full minute in her dark green with her chin up, and then she said, in a small, clear, perfectly ordinary voice, "I should like to sit down." And they let her sit down, and she never gave another answer in that court to anybody about anything. The verdicts came on the 14th day. Morwenna, Queen Consort, guilty upon the information of the unlawful causing of grievous injury to the person of the sovereign. Cassius, Lord Cassius, keeper of the privy purse, guilty of perverting the public record, guilty of the suborning of witnesses, guilty of procuring the destruction of evidence. Ferris Croom, who had erased a night and then sworn to it, was granted the Crown's indemnity, dismissed from the household service, and went home to Coulter Row and slept, his wife told me afterwards, for 2 days. Elias Dunnock, 19 years old, asked leave to be recalled, and came back into the box on the 12th day of his own free will with his new coat buttoned wrong, and told the court what he had seen on the landing, and then what had been said to him on the quay before the boat, and by whom, and for how much. He wept doing it. Nobody in that chamber thought the less of him, and the justiciar said so from the bench, which cost him nothing and meant a great deal. And Princess Adela came. She was the king's aunt, and it was she who had held the line in the first week, she who had told the upper staff in so many words that the realm would not survive a poisoned crown in its first month, that the accident was an accident, and that anybody who said otherwise was an enemy of the crown. She had believed it. That was the worst of it, and she knew it. She went into the witness box in black, 70 years old, straight as a ramrod, and gave the whole of it, names, dates, the meeting in her own drawing room where Cassius had told her that a trial would kill her brother. and at the end she turned to the bench and asked leave to say one thing more. "My lord," she said, "I ordered this household to be silent. I did it because I was afraid, and I called my fear *duty*, which is what people of my rank always call it." She looked across the chamber at the dock. "A sergeant of the gate was not afraid. He has stood in a cell for 11 weeks for it, and there is a charge against him in this court that bears my household's name, and I am ashamed of it. That is all I wish to say." She sat down. The gallery did not cheer. It was not that sort of room. But an old man 3 rows back stood up, and then the row stood up, and then most of them were standing, and the Lord Justiciar let it run for perhaps 10 seconds before he called for order, which is 9 seconds longer than the law allows. The sentences were read on a wet morning in the last week of that year. Morwenna was stripped of the style and precedence of Queen Consort, of the honors and revenues of that dignity, and of every appointment in the gift of the household. The instrument of settlement was made absolute. The late Queen Isolde's estate went where it had always belonged. She was banished by warrant to Kelderness, a stone house on a cold coast, for the remainder of her life maintained at the Crown's charge, never again to enter the capital, nor any royal house, nor the presence of the king. Her name was struck from the roll. She heard it standing and said nothing, and was taken out through a side door, and I have not seen her since and never shall. Lord Cassius was barred for life from any office of profit under the crown, ordered to make restitution of the sums he had drawn from the privy purse, and confined for a term of years. The last I heard of him he was teaching languages badly. And then the Lord Justiciar turned to the informations against me. He did not send the matter to a jury. He gave a ruling instead, and it is printed in the law books of the realm now, and Nell has a copy of it on the shelf in her kitchen where other women keep a Bible, and I have never once been able to read it in her hearing. He said that a man who takes a thing that is not his takes it, and no fine words alter that. That I had made a copy without authority and carried it out through a gate I was sworn to hold, and that if the law were nothing but a machine, it would grind me. And then he said this: "But an oath of secrecy sworn to the crown is sworn * for the crown. It is not a coat to be thrown over the crown's enemies. This court will not hold that a man may be silenced by the very institution he swore to defend, in order that a crime against that institution may go unpunished. If the Household Secrets Act means that a sergeant of the King's Guard must stand at his gate and watch the truth carried out of the building in a bag, then the act is a fraud upon the realm, and this court will not lend itself to it. The informations against Cadan Wren are dismissed. He leaves this court without a stain, and with rather more honor than most of us who have sat in it." They opened the dock and I walked out of it, and my legs did not work very well, and RSM Godric Stane was standing at the bottom of the steps with my cap in his hands, and he gave it to me and he said, "Sergeant, you're improperly dressed," which is the kindest thing anybody has ever said to me. King Alaric did not die. That is the part I most want set down, because I lived for a year in the certainty that I had killed him, and I was wrong, and a man ought to say so. He read the Chronicle on the morning it printed, at Carrowdale, with his tea going cold, and his nurse says he sat with it for an hour and did not speak, and then he asked for his coat. He came into that courtroom on the 4th day of the trial and sat in the gallery, an old gray man with a stick, and he came every day after it. And on the day of the sentences he sat in the front row and looked at the woman he had married for 11 years while the warrant of banishment was read to her, and he did not weep, and he did not look away. His heart did not fail. The physicians had given him a year. He lived 7, and he spent a good deal of them out on the downs with his dog. He sent for me once, in the spring after the trial. I was shown into a room with a fire and a great many books, and he waved me into a chair before I could refuse it. "They tell me," he said, "that my son asked you to be silent." "He did, sir." "And that you refused a king." "I did, sir." On what authority? I had thought about the answer to that question for 11 weeks in a cell, and I gave it to him the way I had it. On the authority of the man at the gate, sir. If the king's guard will hold a thing back from a king because it will hurt him, then we are not guarding him. We are managing him. I have never once been told what a king is asterisk for asterisk. But I know what a gate is for, and it is to let the truth in and keep the lie out, and I couldn't see that it mattered which side of the door it was standing on. He was quiet a long time. "Sergeant," he said at last, "I laid down a crown because I was tired. You laid down your life because you were not. I have had a good many months to sit with which of us was the lesser man." He put out his hand. "Thank you for my son." King Rowan offered me a knighthood and I refused it, which caused a certain amount of trouble, and then he offered me command of the palace guardroom, and I refused that too, and he sat back and looked at me the way his father had. "Then what do you want, Sergeant?" "Two things, sir. My daughter's place in the still room, and the housekeeper's post when it falls vacant, if she earns it, and she will, and if she doesn't, then not." "Done, and the second?" "The Armoury Gate, sir, my old post." He stared at me. "You want your asterisk gate back?" "Yes, sir." "Cadan," he said, "you can have anything in this realm." "Then I'll have the gate, sir." So I had it, and I stood it 6 more years, and I wrote in the watch book every day, and by the time I stood down there was a copy of that book at every inner door of every royal house in Eldermore, the leaf, the carbon, the undercopy sewn into the spine, cut open once a year before the men whose hands wrote it. They call it the honest spine now. It is in the standing orders. Nobody remembers why, which is exactly as it should be. They relit the Chapel Stair, too. 41 pages of inquiry, and that one recommendation was a good one. Last month a recruit came down to my gate on his first night watch, 18, terrified, cap on crooked, and stood there working himself up to it for a quarter of an hour before he asked me, "Sergeant, is it true what they say you did?" And I looked at the lamp and the worn step and the gray book on the lectern with its chain, and I thought about how to tell a boy of 18 that there is no great moment when a man chooses honor, that it is not a bright thing with trumpets, that it is a cold cellar at 4 in the afternoon, and a receipt from a clerk, and a daughter scraping out a pan and saying that a true thing only gets heavier, and that you do not know while you are doing it whether you are a hero or a fool, and that you very likely never will. So I gave him the short answer, which was the true one. "I wrote down what I saw," I said. "That's all, that's the whole trade, son. They will tell you the tunic is for standing still in. It isn't. It's for standing still in until asterisk." He thought about that for a while. Then he squared his cap and took his place at the gate, and I turned back to the lectern, and I opened the book, and I wrote down the hour.